Andrew Harding is the BBC correspondent, and Solly Moeng is MD of the reputation management company DonValley. They are with me to discuss our situation right now. We are less than a month to go before the elections on May the 8th. Now, doing a comparative study, and let me start with you, which country do you think in the world we compare to or has gone through the kind of experience that we are going through now?
Well, the striking thing about South Africa, and I guess it's true for a lot of big countries, it's true for most countries, is that sense of exceptionalism. You could say parochialism, but introspection. So yeah. South Africa is unique. It's unique on the continent. Its own experiences cannot be mirrored anywhere else. And I think that's been part of South Africa's problem, that it doesn't look abroad and see what other African countries are doing, what Ethiopia's doing. I know there's talk about what Rwanda's doing, and that's an authoritarian government. So it's hard to pick off the shelf one country that is
But there are mistakes that we made, I suppose, that we could have avoided. I mean, applying a global perspective on things and a long-term take on the time that we've traversed. 25 years of democracy.
Which is both a long time and also no time at all. As the older you get, the more you realise that we, to unpick the legacy of apartheid is going to take more than a generation. Yeah. And sometimes I think particularly we foreign commentators and correspondents come in with a sense of impatience and expect things to have changed a lot quicker than they have. What I also find interesting here is the extent to which the trends we're seeing here of identity politics, of negative leaders, people like Trump, who campaign and who do well on a populist platform that is telling people how bad things are. Whereas, of course, Obama and other leaders have done very well with the opposite, and generally I think do better in politics by trying to inspire. And the extent to which South Africa is influenced by those things, and that the current kind of negative political sphere you're in is influenced by, well, we know the growth of social media, of course the 2008 global financial meltdown, and now the growth of identity politics. Whether actually these are very global trends or whether these are unique to South Africa.
Well, I find, Solly, that we're not that proud or focused on strengthening the Constitution and being proud of it and operating from there. People are more interested in their party political interests and would support that more than they would support the Constitution. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, it's because we don't have a leader who's able to step out of his party political attire. As I said, you need somebody who needs to point to the Constitution, to the Bill of Rights, to the values that are enshrined in those documents. Once you have a leader who doesn't do that, everybody thinks those things are not important. That's why today people are beginning to question the contribution of Nelson Mandela. The people who were there when Nelson Mandela was around, I don't hear them standing up sufficiently to say, no, it's not true. Look at the context under which all of these things happened. So they're allowing these youngsters to go around and say Nelson Mandela sold us out, which is really, really sad. Look, once we fail to live according to the institutions that we put in place, and Thabo Mbeki, with due respect, was the first one to fail. When he tried to defend the corrupt commissioner at the time, Jackie Silebi, by suspending a very respected NDPP, he basically said, because you want to do what you should be doing, I'm going to take you out of your position, which is what he did.
Which you think set the tone for what?
Definitely. And then just prior to Zuma becoming president, they went back to Vusi Pikoli and said, listen, we're happy to put you back into your position, but there's one condition, don't touch the old man. And he said, no, I can't do that. The law says I have to act without fear, favor, or prejudice. And they said, well, in that case, we're going to take you off. And from then on, it's been a slide downwards. So there is the constitutions of the institutions that we have put in place are no longer taken seriously. Zuma has spent 10 years almost putting the wrong people to head those institutions, people who are not inspired by the rule of law. They were inspired by the people. They were rent makers, as it were. There were people who were there or rent seekers who were there to do favors in return for other favors, and it's become so endemic. 10 years is a long time to position people in all of our states and institutions, not not just in South Africa, but in our diplomatic missions as well. We know that wrong people have been posted abroad into our embassies, consulates, overseas. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work, and our labor relations laws and all of that will not make it easy for any president to come in and say, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be there, you're not supposed to be there, you're not supposed to be there, because a lot of those people are not the ones who are going to help us advance this country.
Well, but you know, we as we go through our own problems and challenges, there are other problems and challenges emerging elsewhere in the world. And one would have thought that we would learn from them. And I would like you, Andrew, to pick up specific things where you think South Africa had an opportunity to do better, but actually regressed on. I'm thinking of Zimbabwe as an example, and of course with a lot of Zimbabweans coming to South Africa, one would have thought that as South Africans will realize that you must pay attention to certain things that happen in government or what's happening in Venezuela. And the fact that at a certain point for a long time, South Africa was the leading economy on the continent, but our economy over the past 10 years or so, was growing at best 1.2% per year, when it used to grow at some point at 5% a year. So
what's interesting is we have this sort of multipolar world now breaking out with the Americans losing their kind of leading role, how South Africa, which always seemed to be the kind of leading light with its constitution on the continent looking for liberal democracy, is now embracing Venezuela's leadership, is now backing an openly, clearly fraudulent election in the Democratic Republic of Congo, is seeming to find more in common with Putin's Russia and China than with a Europe that is still spoken of in the language of empire and post-colonialism. But one thing that strikes me in particular, reading through the current manifestos of the parties, and you talk about issues that aren't being reflected here, is climate change. You know, there are nods to it in all the main three manifestos, but there's no sense of ambition, of energy about, for instance, how to turn South Africa into the world's centre for green technology. I mean, you have all the space, you have all the sunshine, and yet all you have is very unambitious talk about fixing Eskom, which I realise is a major priority, but there doesn't seem to be much vision. It seems as if everyone's focused on these small, very deep problems, but no one offering that kind of radical change which can really galvanise a country.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes I think about this and wonder how we remain a stable democracy with the high unemployment rate that we have. I'm just because most of the time, in many parts of the world where they have democratic systems in place, unemployment seems to be one of the triggers of change of government. But it's not the case in South Africa. But you know, what does it say about our spirit? That maybe we are resilient people?
Look, I don't think that the ANC will be in this honeymoon forever. All right, I think there will come a time when South Africans realize that change is urgent. It has to happen. Yeah, if we think about the opportunity cost of state capture, for instance, a lot of money, people could more than $1 trillion rands were taken out of the system. Local municipalities do not have the resources anymore to deliver services. A lot of state-owned entities don't have the money anymore. Look at the SABC, look at Eskom, they're coming to beg, SAA, all of them. Where does that money come from? At the same time, the tax base is being reduced. A lot of the people who could be paying a lot of money to the system are leaving the country. Small businesses are closing. So one day, government is going to come in, say the new government after the elections, with a fancy program that they managed to convince South Africans is the right one to save us. They find that there's no money to deliver on that program. South Africans are going to wake up again. You're going to see the kind of destruction that you see at local level.
But here's a strange thing. I mean, notwithstanding everything we're talking about, South Africa is still a transparent society.
Right.
You're saying they're going to find out that there's no money. But that fact, that point is already known. Well, I mean, that the country has got a high debt level and has got certain challenges that it must be dealt with almost immediately, and they are going to be debt funded anyway, that there's no money for that. We know that SARS has under-collected up front.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we might know that, but there's still a lot of denial or denialism out there. A lot of people do not connect the dots. People don't realize that actually we are in trouble. They know. I mean, how do you explain people defending Ace Magashule, despite everything that we know about him, despite everybody knows that he took money that was put aside to help emerging black farmers in the Eastern Cape. He gave it to the Guptas. Everybody knows that. Why are people defending him? And the people who are defending him are not the wealthiest people.
Again, you know, and Andrew, please come in here. On that point, this is a typical refrain in South Africa, that he's innocent until proven guilty, and that he's not being charged by anyone and has not been prosecuted on that basis. Respect the law, respect the Constitution, and the man is innocent until then. For now, let him be in his position. Andrew?
Well, the short-term crisis for South Africa, that from the outside world's perspective, I guess, is how does Cyril Ramaphosa manage this rift within the ANC? And has the Zuma faction, as we kind of call it, already lost, but they just haven't realised it, and are going through this sort of slow decline as the state and the legal system and the prosecution system strengthens, and they will be dealt with in the due process and due course of time? Or actually, is this a threat that, for all Cyril Ramaphosa's good intentions and steady institutional work over the last year, cannot be dealt with, cannot be stitched up, and that this will destroy the party and will put the country, you know, into deeper debt, will be written off by the you know, as junk by the ratings agencies, and really will push South Africa over that non-existent cliff that we all think doesn't exist, but actually in financial and economic terms really does exist.
Sure, and to go back to your point, Solly, earlier on, I mean, the ANC, for instance, is managing its own internal issues the way it is. You referred to Ace Magashule, but many South Africans are still to feel as strongly as you do on this matter. The media seems to be generally the institution, or that is very keen on that story. Many people say, well, it might be of interest to you, Stratcom. It's more a Stratcom thing. It's not. It's not the nation's issue or interest. Why is that? There seems to be a gap between how the general public perceives issues and how the media generally perceives issues.
Look, I think that what South Africa needs is another political formation. All the political formations that we have in place have a history. They have some kind of shower hanging over their head. The DA will always be seen as racist, or being there for the interest of white people. The EFF is clear about what it stands for. BLF is clear what it stands for. So the ANC is the better devil that we have in the house, as it were. I think what South Africans need is an alternative that's credible. So somebody has to stand up out there and say, we can do it differently. But it cannot be some of the existing guys, because they all have their own issues. I think for as long as the opposition is weak and it's splintered, the ANC will continue to be seen as the only place for hope, which is, of course, misplaced hope, really. And
adding to what you were saying about the media and their role, it's well known that around the world the media is struggling at the moment because of the internet, because of funding crises, and there is a lack of trust, and we've seen that with deregulation in America. So you have these right-wing and left-wing broadcasting organizations, so there's no middle ground. And unfortunately in South Africa, the SABC has struggled for a good decade, and trust in that has eroded. And as a public broadcaster, the BBC, I believe that has to be that marketplace of ideas where everyone engages and trusts, and that a public broadcaster, not a state broadcaster, as Mr. Magashule pointed out recently, a public broadcaster can play that role, even in a culture, media culture, which is being torn at the sides and where trust is eroding. But you have to have something like that, and you have to fight for that.
Andrew Harding and Solly Moeng will pick up the conversation as we look at the road ahead. Post May the 8th, what kind of South Africa do we think will emerge after the elections? And of course, we welcome your views on Twitter. The hashtag is the Modise Network. Don't go away.